So with House of Dragon and The Boys new seasons coming up, this is the perfect time for me to jump in and give my review for the first season of House of Dragon. If you haven't seen it, this won't necessarily be a spoiler review. Just giving a little bit of my feedback on the show in general. Be sure you do this one, do that one. Cool. So House of Dragon is the spin-off / prequel to Game of Thrones. It's set thousands of years before the events of Game of Thrones. It follows the House of Targaryen. If you're watching this or this found you, I'm just going to assume that you remember who the Targaryens were from Game of Thrones. And so what I'll start by saying is what this story has going for it is everything that Game of Thrones set up. Aside from the characters and their relationships and the family tree aspect of it, a lot of what I liked about Game of Thrones I did find in House of Dragon. And it was more than enough by the end of the last episode to have me excited to watch the second season and see what they do. There's a few key characters that you follow throughout the show who are the most important. I would say by the end of the first season, the show really focuses on the main two female leads. Alyssa Hightower, played by Olivia Cook, and Rhaenyra Targaryen. I can't really remember how they pronounce it in the show. They're really the two main leads. A lot of the events and a lot of things that happen in the show center around both of them, especially by the time it gets to that last episode. You can really see where the two different sides land. By the time it gets to the end and everybody's standing on the side that they choose, that's what makes me feel the first season was majority set up. This show does a great job at establishing everyone's character motivations, and Damien is kind of like that wild card throughout the first season. You never really truly knew if he was evil or just fucking with his brother. Even though his brother's the king, a lot of it was feeling shunned and petty. All of the main characters I wound up liking by the end, so I'm just gonna shorten that up here by saying that now. Someone who I found the MVP of the first season when it comes to the actors was the king, Paddy Considine. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that one right either. But Paddy Considine, he's given the most to do throughout the entire first season. I thought his interpretation of the king within the Game of Thrones universe, this king felt like he had more to do than any other king that we've seen in Game of Thrones. I haven't read the books, I'm strictly going off the TV show. As far as all the kings that we've ever seen in Game of Thrones, King Viserys had the most to deal with within the season he was in. It's the only time that I'll say that if I had to compare Game of Thrones to House of Dragon, it's the only thing that I'll say that I do like better than anything they did in Game of Thrones with the king. By the way, my personal favorite from Game of Thrones was Robert Baratheon. Joffrey was a dick and his brother jumped out a window, so he wasn't around too long. And by the time the show ended, we didn't see anything from, can't remember out the top.
Landmines?
Landmines! It was landmines.
Game of Thrones, throughout its run, never had the story focus on the king the way House of Dragon did, and how he goes about certain things to fulfill what he feels is his duty as king.
I love you. It's all right.
Cyrus, please.
It's all right.
No, I'm scared. Nothing.
Don't be scared.
What's happening?
Don't be scared. They're going to break the paper.
Making the first incision.
This king has more to do than anything I've seen in Game of Thrones. When it does happen, the action is some of the best moments of the show. Counting deaths too. The dragons look great throughout the entire season. You can tell that most of the CGI budget went to the dragons, especially in one of the later episodes of the season. If you feel that you didn't get enough of the dragons in Game of Thrones, you're getting everything you asked for in House of Dragon. With the story, what it boils down to is King Viserys' daughter, Rhaenyra. There it is, Rhaenyra. I think it's Rhaenyra. And Otto Hightower daughter, Alyssa Hightower. They're what the show's building on and centering around. The two faces of their houses when we head into season 2. Their arcs throughout the season is surprisingly well done. It starts off a little shaky in that first episode, but episode by episode, you can see that it's actually growing to something and it means something. Just a couple of things that held the show back from me liking it more than I wanted to was the use of the day to night effect. At times it made things very hard to see. And it never looks natural. Sure, of the reason they used it could have been for budget reasons, could have just been easier to shoot. There are shows from the past that have had scenes at night that looks 1,000 times better than how those night scenes look in House of Dragon. Shows like True Blood took place majority at night. These are both on HBO, which is the only reason I bring it up. So it's a step back in those terms. But as far as what we get on screen, there is obvious green screen backgrounds, CGI backgrounds. Those moments took me out of the world we were supposed to be in, which is Game of Thrones, Westeros. I could get past it, but it sorely stuck out. Game of Thrones never felt. I'm sure that there were scenes where they used green screen, and especially in the later seasons when they pretty much gave up, you could tell the scenes that used more green screen. But for the most part, when you watch Game of Thrones, the sky never feels artificial, backgrounds never feel artificial. Anything about the setting of the movie never felt artificial. And that's counting the dragon scenes that we did get in Game of Thrones. In House of Dragon, like I said, the CGI holds up on the dragons for the most part, but everything else is shortcut. I would like it a lot if either they got better at it to where I didn't notice it, or they just didn't use the day to night effect. But I'm hoping that doesn't come back in season 2. And anytime the scene takes place outside, it seems like standard 2020 CGI cover-up bullshit. If it would have stayed somewhere in the vein of first episode when Rhaenyra comes back on the dragon on Cyrax, if it would have stayed somewhere around there, I might not have noticed it, or it might not have bothered me as much. One of the last things that somewhat bothered me was the time jumps. When they very first started doing it in the beginning, it seemed like that they didn't skip anything important time-wise. But after that third episode and the show goes on, time jumps get longer and longer and longer. I want to say it's around 20, 30 years, if not longer, that they wind up skipping by the time it reaches the last episode. I'm not 100% sure on that, but I do know that there's a lot of time jumps after that third episode. There's times where I thought it was okay, but then I felt like it quickly interrupted the flow of the show. It's something that I hope stops or at least slows down in the second season. Like, there's an episode, there's talks of a battle and there's strategy being made and all of this. And then by the time we get to the next episode where the battle should take place, not only do we not ever see the battle, but it's been 2 years after the battle. It's moments like that where I felt like the time jumps, they went from, they were just being used as a tool to a quick and cheap cop out, to not spend money. Not saying that we don't get a battle scene in here, but I'm saying that one seemed like it was the one, but then the very next episode it's over and dealt with. It kind of makes it feel like the first few episodes we spent setting this up, or we spent watching this, led nowhere and to nothing, only to be forgotten about one episode later. I do get why the time jumps were necessary if there's a lot of ground to cover story wise, but I do think they could have been done better and at better times. All of that being said, I still highly enjoyed the first season. It definitely fills that Game of Thrones hole somewhat. It fills the spot in my heart for Game of Thrones. It's definitely holding that place right now. I'm just hoping that the second season improves on the negatives that I did have. Honestly, at this point, I feel like there's no more need for time jumps, at least not so soon. I still had a good time with House of Dragon. Good enough to give it a 7 out of 10. There's definitely a couple episodes in here that I feel like are just filler. There was at least one episode that if you skip, it would feel like you missed nothing. Anyway, I'm looking forward to seeing what season 2 got. Let me know what you're thinking about House of Dragon in the comments below. And until next time, alright y'all.